All right, thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, so as usual, just gonna kind of give a little quick introduction. The Gospel of Thomas is a book that was known of in early Christianity, spoken of, alluded to, etc. Fragments of it were found in the late 19th century, although nobody knew for sure that it was the Gospel of Thomas until the entire Gospel was found in 1945 in Nag Hammadi, and it is now pretty much available through the Nag Hammadi codices. You can find it online. It's fairly well known. What it basically is a list of 114 different what they call logions or sayings of Yeshua, or sayings essentially incidents in his ministry, or parables, if you will, of Yeshua. But it's part of a broader, how should I say, grouping of, how should we say, scattered words or logion of Yeshua. Some of his sayings have been preserved to us outside of the canon, or allegedly preserved to us from outside of the canon, and they are broadly called agrapha, which means they're not written down. But the only way, of course, that we know about them is that they are written down. It's just that largely what it is that you will find that this saying is an alleged saying of Yeshua, and that's given to us by this, church historian, or by this, early church book, for example. Some of these things are found in, like, for example, the Epistle of Clement or the Epistle of Barnabas. Some of them are found in Eusebius and, just various places like that. But the Gospel of Thomas is kind of special because it's supposedly written down by Thomas based on his interactions with Yeshua, that he listened to what Yeshua said, he wrote them down, is what this says. And we've already gone over the first, I think, 15 logion on here. So I won't go over all of that except just in brief, because otherwise we won't make any progress. One of the first things that I pointed out, though, if you were here for our first thing, and if you'll see it in the highlighted sections, if you have it in front of you, is that the Greek version of it, the earlier one, the one whose fragments were found in the late 19th century, they seem to contain more in the way of embellishments. They seem to contain more in the way of additional words. And for the most part, what these are is sayings from the Gospel of Thomas that have been relocated, like as if this were his study copy and he were trying to make connections between this logion and another one down here, and so he was basically connecting the dots, apparently. But it seems to be more of a study guide or study version, whereas the Coptic, which we have basically in its entirety, and here is in this particular Gospel, that one is in the black text, or whatever. This is from more of a purer text. So this is judged to be the more reliable, and fortunately for us, it's the more complete. But starting with Logion 16, let me read it. It says, "Men think perhaps that it is peace that I have come to cast upon the world. They do not know that it is dissension which I have come to cast upon the earth. Fire, sword, and war. For there will be 5 in a house, and 2 will be against 3, and 3 against 2, and a father against the son, and the son against the father, and they will stand solitary." The thought here is that there are 3 dispensations to be given to man. The idea is that everything leading up to the coming of Yeshua is basically the Jewish dispensation, that which was given to the Jews, and it exists to us in the form of the Old Testament, and other writings such as pseudepigraphal writings, most of which were not accepted by the early by the Jews at the time of Yeshua. But a lot of these things are alluded to in the Christian scriptures nonetheless. But the idea is that there were supposed to be 3 dispensations, that given to the Jews and that which is given to the Christians. And then that 3rd dispensation would be the one at the end of time. There's several allusions to a coming teaching, if you will. Yeshua talks about that Elijah will come, for example, and set all things right, or that the Comforter will come and lead us into all truth. So these are future teachings. Now, mostly the church has taught that happened at Pentecost, that was, early on in the Christian age. And so they're convinced that what you have before you in the canon, in the 66 books or whatever it is that your particular canon allows, that's it, and that's been a settled issue for a very long time. But the idea is that towards the end of time, there would come a 3rd revelation, something that would open our eyes. Now, my approach to these books is entirely literary. The strength of this argument, if it is to be an argument, is that it can be shown literarily. Most of what we accept about what is canon, what is not canon, or what is correct teaching or whatever, is based on other people's assessments. It's based on the idea that there were authorities that got together and they agreed on, for example, which books would be included and which ones wouldn't, and what doctrines would be considered sound and which ones wouldn't. But that's all kind of a top-down approach that has to do with authority. We have the authority, we've gotten together with our knowledge and with our collective wisdom or with our whatever, that we've made these decisions on your behalf, and that what we are giving you, in other words, is kind of a top-down thing. Sort of an outside-in kind of thing. These books are in, those books are out. So you're talking about one fundamental way of looking at something. Whereas the alternative point of view is that there is a voice that speaks in the scripture, something that kind of comes from the inside out, one which is a literary argument rather than, or not merely limited to, a literal argument. Which isn't to say that the things in the Bible aren't literally true, but there is a literary aspect nonetheless. And the reason why you know this is because Yeshua would constantly take the disciples to task for being too literal and not literary enough in what they were saying. Yeah. When he says, for example, that, let the dead bury their dead, no way to take that literally. You can't say that dead people are literally going to get out with shovels and dig, while they're dead. You know what I'm saying? Other people who are also dead. You know what I'm saying? That it doesn't, so there's certain points at which you have to say this has to be literary. This is a literary aspect. So one of the first things that Thomas teaches you, or Yeshua teaches you by means of Thomas, who wrote these things down, is that whoever finds the interpretations of these sayings will not experience death. So we're looking at death as a literary, as a function of the meaning of what death is. If you retrofit this statement, whoever finds the interpretations of these things will not experience death, that means that the experience of death literally means, literarily, that you don't have the interpretation of these things, and therefore you're walking in a spiritual death, right? In ignorance. And so, for example, it's kind of a joke about what is the speed of light. Well, what is the speed of dark, because it got there first. You know what I'm saying? Darkness is kind of the default state of being if you don't have light, right? So, in other words, if you're given this top-down interpretation and you just take it on face value, this means, these books are in, those books are out, based on authority or whatever, that kind of cuts off your ability to question anything outside of that paradigm. And so that is a paradigm which, if it exists, you're able to cut through it if you're able to see through it, and you're able to break through that barrier. And one of the things that these books allow us to do is they allow us to break through those barriers, because if for example, the dead burying their own dead, if what that means is that those who don't know the Bible literarily are quote-unquote dead, like it speaks of in Thomas, then you can take that understanding from Thomas and then apply it to where you see it in the canonical scriptures. If you're able to see that connection and work out the parables in the same way in both sets of books, what that serves to do is it undermines the whole top-down aspect of things.
Yes.
And so that's kind of a long way of putting it. But what that essentially means is that there's two sets of people. Those who believe in three revelations, one sort of at the beginning to point to him who would come, right? Like it speaks of on their in Luke as they were on their way to Emmaus,
Yes.
for example. The one aspect was that there was a foretelling of the coming of the Son, the messianic figure, and that all of those prophecies that spoke of him through the Psalms and through all of the other scriptures were pointing to the Yeshua.
Right.
And as they were walking along, their eyes were being held even so as not to see him for who he truly was,
Yes.
but through his word,
Yes.
right? So they wouldn't see
Yes.
him visually, but they would understand him through their intuition, right? And finally, when it was revealed to them who he was, then he, in the flesh, all of a sudden disappeared. And what was left was what they remembered and what they were told,
Yes.
and that their hearts burned within them because they were making those connections.
Yes.
And so that is sort of an interesting thing to exist within the canon, because it's pointing to the fact that it's not so much what you see on the physical level, but what you can intuit through your understanding of the scriptures. And that once you grasp that, then that which is physical sort of vanishes, sort of disappears.
Yes.
So that the two here represent those who believe in the two revelations, the two dispensations, the people whose minds and thoughts are bound by the canon, for example, that whole top-down thing that says there's the Old Testament, there's the New Testament, that's it, and that's that, right? Whereas the three would represent those people who would think of a further revelation at the end of time. And this is one of those things that's a self-fulfilling kind of prophecy, because if you see it, then for you it exists. When you recognize it, then for you it comes into being. And so, ultimately what this Logians 16 is getting at is that there's going to be a conflict between those who believe in the two revelations versus those who will believe in the third.
Right.
And so that is the war, that is the sword. The sword, of course, remember in the book of Revelation, when he comes back, a sword comes out of his mouth.
Yes.
Right? And so that is a revelation to come at the end of time. So if the sword is the word of God, then that means that when he comes and a sword comes out of his mouth, that means that based on what he's speaking, another revelation or another set of scriptures or another, avenue for us to speak, the word of God becomes open to us. And then he kind of expounds upon it in the next verse. It says, I shall give you what no eye has seen and what no ear has heard and what no hand has touched and what has never occurred to the human mind. So that's kind of a mouthful. Couple of things. The term apocryphal books or pseudepigraphal books or any of that, they all refer to things which are hidden away. Books that are sort of either relegated to the academic, community where maybe your pastors read it, maybe they read it in college, maybe your average Christian reads it kind of on the side or whatever as a curiosity or some other reason. But it's not something that in churches has been heard, let's say. It's not something that in churches has been spoken.
Right.
It's not something that we've really seen. And it's really not something that's even occurred to the church to really even consider over time. So if this bears on that, then that would be an explanation for that. And I brought this along too. Me and my printer had a disagreement this morning. I was going to print out about 3 or 4 copies of these, and maybe if I have a chance to do it, I'll bring it next week. But this is a compilation that I did where I combined the Agrapha with the Gospel of Thomas. And I ordered these things in such a way that one flowed into another, flowed into another, flowed into another, so that you can read it from beginning to end as if it were like 350 different sayings. It's somewhere along those lines, about 350 different logians that come from this source and that. And what's amazing about it is the way that one will flow into another, and it forms one big thing. So I'm going to just kind of pass that around. If you want to take a look at it, take a couple of minutes. I think I'll leave it here, but I kind of want to just have it here in the church,
Yes.
you know, at least until I bring some more to give out, just in case anybody wants to look at it.
We can take it in.
But it's an interesting read because it's kind of like the person who was using who had the Greek copy of Thomas, who was kind of adding stuff, right? And I know it says not to add or to take away, and that's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to show you that the interrelationships. How does this come from this time and this place? And then this other verse come from this other time and this other source, and then this other verse. You know what I'm saying? How does it flow smoothly like that? How does one thing lead into another? It's more than just the sum of its parts. Yes?
The Gospels, there's, sometimes all 4 Gospels will have input about an event. One a little bit different from another, and yet it expands. When you read them all about the event, it expands the totality of the understanding of the event.
Right, and that's how you know that it's more than just the sum of its parts. There's something behind all of that.
Yes.
The one person will bring up something, another person will enhance it. Let's say another person might bring it to a conclusion.
Actually, as far as an evaluation of it, it makes it more legitimate, because when you have eyewitness accounts, they're never always exactly perfect one for one, so it's not like one copied another. These are, you can tell they're actually 4 different people who had 4 different experiences with the information they got and put it down on paper.
Yeah, and that's to a believer, to somebody within the church, and especially something that's easy to believe like the canon, that makes sense.
Yes.
What this is kind of asking us to stretch ourselves beyond that, which I know that some people may be less comfortable with that than others, but I think the more that they see it and the more that they recognize it, the very fact that if you look at it and understand it from a literary angle, if you see it from that particular angle, a lot of these sayings just come alive. They just make sense. And the thing is, when he says, when you come to understand these words and you're made free by this understanding, you see what I'm saying? Once you do become free of it and you do start to see it and you do start to understand it, right, then again it's self-fulfilling. So it's all self-referential and self-fulfilling.
Yes.
And that's what's interesting about the Agrapha, is because it's all self-referential, that you have one line here and another line there and another line there and another line there, and it's all like they're talking from the same page.
Yeah.
It's all like they're speaking with one tongue, so to speak. They're all speaking with one voice.
Yeah.
Voice being the spiritual understanding, the spiritual language. So I would invite people to go over that and look at that and contemplate that. And like I said, I'll print out more of those. I'm actually probably going to refine it just a little bit further. I've been going over it time after time after time after time, trying to get it as linear as I can. Because that's the instruction, to make the ways straight,
Yes.
to make things straight.
Yes.
The fact that you've got a verse here and a verse here and a verse here and in this volume and in that volume and it's scattered this way and that way and in this book and in that, it hides things from people.
Yes.
And the academics, don't get me wrong, I mean, they have their place, but as far as I'm concerned, the fact that no one apparently has made any real attempt to even do this,
Yes.
in their studies or whatever, it just belies the fact that this is the way that I believe that the Lord does an in run around people and their linear
And there's nothing that doesn't parallel the gospel.
Well, it's highly related. There's some unrelated subject matter in these books, which you'll see. There's things that are kind of alluded to in the gospel. Like you'll see, for example.
Because I can hear the connections.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that. And that by itself isn't necessarily the only proof. The issue is that it speaks from beginning to end as one big document. You don't find any contradictions, first of all. You'll find that questions that you might have about something in isolation, that you get answers when you see them in the context of other sayings.
Yes.
And so Scripture then interprets Scripture.
Yes.
And so you're allowed to see things as they truly are. And once you see things as they truly are, then a lot of these sayings in Thomas make sense, because you're amazed. Because you come alive, let's say, the Scriptures come alive to you. You're seeing them from the inside out. You're seeing them from a literary angle. And like I've said before several times, the strength of this argument is that it is literary. Like if And I'll bring one, that at least one that has the actual sources so that you can cross-reference it. Like, this is from Thomas, this is from Eusebius, this is from, some other source or whatever, and you can actually see it. But, you'll be amazed at the way in which, one verse or whatever is from such a disparate source, and yet it looks as if they were meant to be together. Yes?
Now, to be completely clear, not everything in the scripture is literary. There is definitely a lot of literal. So it's not all one or all the other. It depends
A lot of that
on
you have
what
to
it is.
discern by the context. That's
Yes.
the thing. I mean,
Yes,
when you, the one thing I would say, and I would probably emphasize this, is that however literal anything may be, there's generally speaking a literary aspect to it as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
and
what I
this
was
is in
about
no
to say,
way
is that
to.
it is
That's-
often both.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but sometimes you see it in
Yeah,
isolation.
right.
You read the book of Revelation, you're not thinking literal dragons, you're not thinking literal beasts, you're not thinking
Right.
literal
Being
horrors.
born
you're
But
not
again.
thinking
on
literal
the
horror.
other hand, in like Genesis, there is a lot of literal, and a lot of people try to argue that
Right.
Genesis is just literary when
Right.
there is a lot of literal in.
And it
Yeah,
is
that's
not
also-
literary, and yet it is literal.
Yeah, I still, it's like I said, I think that there's always a spiritual aspect to it.
Yes.
That's why, like, one of the easiest keys to seeing any of this stuff is to always insert the word spiritual in front of it. If you're talking about eyes, don't just think about the eyes of the flesh, think about spiritual eyes.
Yeah.
If you're talking about ears or hearing, don't just think about literal hearing, also think about spiritual hearing. This is really the only angle I'm coming from. But I will say that some things are mutually exclusive. Like, for example, the dead burying their own dead. That's not meant for us to conjure up a visual of the literal. So a lot of times the literal is excluded, but not always. And so
Yes.
when you look at where the literal isn't really excluded as a logical possibility,
Right.
then that certainly leaves it open that it happened in reality, or that it's speaking of something that is real. But knowing what this understanding is, given that no eye has really seen through this, or that no ear or spiritual ear has heard this,
Right.
that no spiritual hand, for example, has touched this, and this hasn't occurred to our minds or whatever, is sort of true in and of itself, because if it happens to be right, it's not something that was taught through tradition, it's not something that came down to us through those venues. It wasn't taught to us by academia, it wasn't taught to us by the church at large, that this was something held in reserve for the end.
Yes.
And so that kind of flows into the next one. His disciples said to Jesus, "Tell us how our end will be." Jesus said, "Have you discovered then the beginning? That you look for the end. For where the beginning is, there will the end be. Blessed is he who will take his place at the beginning, and he will know the end, and he will not experience death." So we already know that not experiencing death is understanding,
Yes.
right? Whoever comes to find the interpretation of these words will not experience death. So he's reminding us that's kind of the first key to understanding this. And so, in other words, finding the beginning is to understand that if you see at the end that these things were encoded, and you're able to decode them,
Right.
right? The decoding is the end process, right? Whereas the encoding is the beginning process. You see what I'm saying? So to understand the beginning is also to understand the end. Those two are the same phenomena, right? And that's what he's trying to teach us. So say, how do you know what your end will be? Well, again, if you can decode it, it was encoded. If you see
Right.
that at the end, that's the way it was at the beginning.
Just like at the start of Genesis, is the reverse in the book of Revelation. It's going to be all good and new at the end of the book of Revelation. So there's going to be a one world government that was with the time of Nimrod, and then you have a one world government with the Antichrist. You see the parallels there
Yes.
from the end and the beginning.
And for what it's worth, when you talk about the literal nature of Genesis, one thing to bear in mind is that the very beginning of John gives us a parabolic
Yes.
interpretation of that.
Yes.
So there is that dimension to it, and that's in the canonical tradition.
Absolutely.
The next theologian says, Jesus said, "Blessed is he who came into being before he came into being. If you become my disciples and listen to my words, these stones will minister to you. For there are 5 trees for you in paradise which remain undisturbed summer and winter, and whose leaves do not fall. Whoever becomes acquainted with them will not experience death. So there's a couple of things. This one's going to be a little bit tough to explain, especially out of context.
Right.
What are the 5 trees? Well, it's not really given exactly what the 5 trees are, so it's something you have to kind of guess at, or at least try to intuit. A couple of things. The whole not experience death thing shows up again at the end of this statement. So it's related.
Yeah.
The idea is that if you're acquainted with the trees, then you will have knowledge, because you will not experience death. So these trees are a source of knowledge. And trees are, generally speaking, associated with knowledge or teaching. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for example, right? So these trees have to do with knowledge, or these trees have to do with teachings, right? If you're going to be consistent, because that's the way it's supposed to be. It's supposed to work in the canon. It's supposed to work in the non-canonical books. And if you see that parallel, then you have to see it as a teaching. So if there are 5 trees for you in paradise, and the trees have to do with teaching, and if you become acquainted with them, you won't experience death. Experiencing death is to not have the knowledge, and so to not have experiencing death would mean that you have the knowledge of these teachings, right? So that's first thing. So if there are 5 trees, then there's essentially 5 teachings, right? And so how does that relate to coming into being before you come into being? Again, the teaching came into being before we were able to decode it,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
The truth was eternal before we were able to discern it,
Right.
right? So if any of this has to do with teachings, this is the sense you could make of it. One gospel I will allude to is the Gospel of Philip, where it talks about the summer and the winter, right? Because summer and winter are elements that are introduced here. And the Gospel of Philip explains to us that the winter is this world, right? And the summer is the world to come.
Oh, okay.
So if he gives us that key, if we then take that key and apply it here, it remains undisturbed summer and winter.
Right.
In other words, it's the same in this world as it is in the world to come.
Right.
If we apply that particular template to it. And so, what would be the 5 teachings? Well, here's the way I see it. And again, I'm not trying to argue, but remember before he says 2 against 3 and 3 against 2, right?
Yes.
Those who accept the 3 versus those who accept the 2. So this is the other place in the Gospel of Thomas where you see the number 5, right? Because 3 and 2 make 5, right? And so if you have the 2, those are 2 distinct teachings, Judaism and Christianity,
Yes.
right? And then there's the higher level of Judaism, and then there's the higher level of Christianity. So the people who understood Judaism in its messianic sense as foretelling the coming of Yeshua, that would be a different teaching or a different tree.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And then with Christianity, there was the higher and the upper and the lower levels with that, right? So you had the lower level, which was Christianity as taught through tradition, as taught through the many different canons, the many different churches, the many different whatever, would be a tree or a teaching, right? And that really leaves one tree, and that would be, I believe, the 3rd tree, right? And again, it's the going back and retrieving that which was lost,
Yes.
and creating that final tree, if you will, that 5th tree, if you will, that 5th teaching, that 5th understanding. Again, that's based on, other keys that you can get from other places. And so that's about as far as I can take it with that, but that's what I believe that means. The disciples said to Jesus, "Tell us what the kingdom of heaven is like." He said to them, "It is like a mustard seed, the smallest of all seeds, but when it falls on tilled soil, it produces a great plant and becomes a shelter for the birds of the sky."
Yes.
Well, this parallels what you see in the canonical Gospels, and really is hardly any different. So what does that mean? Well, again, for it to start out small and as a seed, and remember the seed is the Word of God.
Yes.
And so for it to grow and for it to flourish, and for it to become a shelter for them or whatever, remember the birds of the sky, if you go back, remember the birds of the sky, if they say to you it is in the heavens, then the birds of the heavens will beat you to it. Or else in the previous parable where it says, let me see if I can find it here. The sower went out, the parable of the sower. It says, and some fell on the road and the birds came and gathered them up. So these are your same people,
Yes.
let's say. So in other words, this particular Logian is pointing to the idea that these birds are going to have a shelter within the teachings, if you will, or within the tree, if you will, that emerges from this particular seed. So I'm not 100% sure if this is referring to Christianity, but for whatever it's referring to, it has to do with those entities who ate the seed, for example, right? So they took it away, right? And if those same people are protected by this tree, in other words, this is 2,000 years, I think, of Christianity that they can hide in this teaching,
Yes.
right? Because the birds are basically, in all cases, they're the bad guys. So my first instinct is to attribute it to them, the false teachers, the ones who consume the word, in other words, the seed. Mary says to Jesus in the next Logian, "Who are your disciples like?" He said, "They're like little children settled in a field which is not theirs. When the owners of the field come, they will say, 'Let us have back our field.' They will undress in their presence in order to let them have back their field and give it back to them. Therefore I say, if the owner of a house knows that a thief is coming, he will begin his vigil before he comes and will not let him dig through into his house of his domain to carry away his goods. You then be on your guard against the world. Arm yourselves with great strength, lest the robbers find a way to come to you, for the difficulty you expect will surely materialize. Let there be among you a man of understanding. When the grain ripened, he came quickly with his sickle in his hand and reaped it. Whoever has ears to hear, let him hear." So a couple of things. When he says whoever has ears to hear, let him hear, he's always obviously talking in a parabolic fashion. That's just a tell.
Yes.
But starting at the beginning, why are they like children? One of the sayings is that, where is it in here? It says that if they should ask you, if they should ask you, "Where are you from?" Say that you came from the light or whatever. And then he identifies the elect as the children of the living Father, right? But the elect are equated to the children. So when he says that you were like children, it means that you were like the elect. So the elect are the true disciples, in other words. And the settled in the field, which is not theirs, that interprets itself here. Again,
Yes.
the Bible, in the scriptures, Jesus says that the field is the world,
Yes.
right? And so later on in the Logian here, he says, "Be on guard against the world,"
Yes.
right? So in other words, that gives you the key there too. So that's actually interpreting it the same way as in the canonicals. It says they're in a field which is not theirs. So he's saying that the world is not yours. This world is not your
Right.
place. When the owners of the field come, that is to say those who are, let's say, the rulers of this world, those to whom
Yes.
the world does belong, because again, you're in the world but not of the world,
Right.
right? But they are. It says, "Let us have back our field," right? And that might just be the extension of the battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness, where the sons of light have escaped their bonds and have walked out of this paradigm and walked in the spirit and escaped from this world and their teaching or whatever. And so they undress. Now, what is the dressing up? Consistently dressing has to do with like the world of the flesh versus the world of the spirit.
Yes.
With religion, it has to do with like religious garments or whatever, like in the book of Jude where it says, that despising even the garment that is stained by the flesh or whatever. The idea is that it has to do with your occupation, or in religious terms specifically, has to do with your religious robes, let's say. You think about priests in robes, you think about pastors in robes and religious garbs and stuff, that all bears the marking of the flesh.
Yes.
So you're going to give back that fleshly robe, if you will,
Yes.
right, and give it back to them, because again, if it comes from them, and what I'm saying, if you're giving it back to them, in other words, it comes from them. So
Right.
it's something that they've bestowed upon you, just like the field that you are in. It says, therefore, if the owner of the house knows that a thief is coming, then he will begin his vigil before he comes and will not let him dig through the house of his domain to carry away his goods. Okay, so some of the things that you can maybe understand from this particular verse is that, number one, the higher level language, the spiritual level understanding is couched in, is inherent in, is one with the lower level terminology.
Right.
So if spiritualize is the spiritual understanding of fleshly eyes, let's say, so when you see the words in their fleshly aspects of it, you're able to extend it to their spiritual aspect and see it on a literary basis, as well as the literal, but I mean, and sometimes instead of the literal.
Right.
The idea is that it cannot, you can't, because the word is kind of ambiguous, that if there's two levels, a higher level and a lower level understanding, you keep people on the lower level by not allowing it to enter their thoughts that there is a higher level meaning, right? It doesn't occur to them that there is a heavenly aspect to what they're reading in the lower level, because what you're reading on the lower level is actually pretty exalted, and that's what's confusing to people. On the lower, if you want to call it the lower level, on the level of the flesh, to go and to heal somebody's physical eyes is an amazing thing. To actually go and heal somebody's physical ears is an amazing thing. To actually raise somebody physically from the dead is astonishing, right? And so even the lower sounds higher. But if it's pertaining to all of men and all of the blindness of mankind, that's something that's beyond just the flesh.
Yes.
It's something that extends into something beyond just the flesh. Or if you're healing a person's ears, well, that's one thing. But if you're healing the ears of all of mankind, if that man represents all men, right, then it's a broader, more universal understanding, and it pertains to every single one of us as well, that our blindness has been cured, or that our deafness has been cured, or that we have gone from spiritual death to spiritual life in the same way that he raised somebody from a physical death to a physical life. And to be on guard against the world, arm yourselves with great strength, lest the robbers find a way to come to you. For the difficulty which you expect will surely materialize. So what would be the difficulty? If, for example, you have the higher level understanding at some point, because again, these people were encoding it and teaching it and passing this on to other people. Because if it's there to be decoded, logically it was encoded.
Right.
And so the difficulty would be in the loss of that mystery. The difficulty would be in the going from the higher level to the lower level. So that's something that's already in your expectation, which is why you're encoding in the first place. Because you wouldn't be encoding it for it to be decoded unless you understood intuitively that there would be a falling away in the interim, right? If there would be a confusion in the interim. So that is the difficulty that you fully expect. The reason why you fully expect it is because you're making preparations for it.
Yeah.
You're couching every spiritual thing in physical fleshly terminology in anticipation of this falling away. So again, that's why you have to have ears to hear, because you have to be able to understand that on the spiritual level. Moving on to the next one. Jesus saw infants being suckled. He said to his disciples, these infants being suckled are like those who enter the kingdom. They said to him, shall we then as children enter the kingdom? And again, here's the idea of the children, right? Remember, the children are the elect of the living Father, is what it says in the Gospel of Thomas. It says, when you make the two one, and when you make the inside like the outside, and the outside like the inside, and the below, above like the below, and when you make the male and the female one and the same, so that the male not be male, nor the female female, and when you fashion eyes in place of an eye, and a hand in place of a hand, and a foot in place of a foot, and a likeness in place of a likeness, then you will enter the kingdom. So that's a lot to kind of unpack.
Yeah.
But the idea is that, okay, so how in the world is infants being suckled, right? Anything like the last part of this, you know, making the male, like, you know, the female, the one and the same, and, you know, I'm fashioning eyes in place of an eye or whatever. The idea is that the infant is being fed directly, right? It's just, it's straight from the mother to the child, right? And later on in the book, it talks about the true mother versus the false mother. For example, you know, my mother gave me and there's a lacuna there, but presumably it's something along the lines of death, because it says, my true mother gave me life. So what is life contrasted with? You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So the idea is that he has a fleshly mother and a spiritual mother.
Also that he's being nourished without any effort, almost no effort.
Yes, that's a brilliant insight, and that's making the outside like the inside.
Yes.
Because what you're doing is, if you make the connection that you're actually living in an unfolding of truth,
Yes.
and if you see that everything has been written ahead of time, he's called the end from the beginning, that he's spoken of things to come, and now you're seeing them come true. If you are, from the fact that you're able to decode, infer that it was encoded, for example,
Yes.
through all that time, you know that he's planned all of this. Just intuitively, you understand that.
Yeah.
And so when you don't put up a fight to that, when you become passively accepting of that, in the same way that a baby is passively accepting of the nourishment from their mother.
And also
right?
the baby isn't, there's no awareness of gender.
Yeah, there's no real awareness of any kind of duality at all. I mean,
No,
the
the baby
child
is
and the
just-
mother
it just
even,
is, yeah.
You know, the child is attached to their mother, you know, in such a way that there really isn't that difference even between them.
Right.
But okay, but what are so as children you enter into the kingdom. In other words, you're not making those distinctions like what you were saying. You were one with your nourisher. You were
Yes.
attached to your nourishment,
Yes.
right? And so those two, the mother and the baby, are one,
Yes.
right? So in other words, you who are being nourished are the same as the nourisher, because one fits the other.
Yes.
Right? And so when you place one eye in place of another, or one hand in place of another, or some, you know, you got to think spiritual eye. You replace the eye of the flesh with the eye of the spirit. When you replace the ear of the flesh, you know, like I only read what I'm told to read, versus, oh, I see that this says this over here and that other says this over here, and I'm putting two and two together, then you're hearing with that other ear, right? So your spiritual ear. So you're replacing one image with another. In the same way that, like, for example, this happened before, when in Hebrews it talks about how, you know, everything came before was just symbols and images, right, of the true thing.
Yeah.
That the priesthood down below is a symbol of the
Foreshadows.
heavenly priesthood.
Yes, yes,
You know, the
yes.
true high priest is actually at the right hand of the Father.
Yes.
So what you're reading on the lower level is actually pointing to something heavenly,
Yes.
right? And so this is just the same thing. It's like deja vu all over again. It's just the
Right.
same thing. Instead of reading it the way it was handed to you by the powers that be, right? That if you're actually taking nourishment from the true mother, in other words, which is
Yes.
spirit, then you actually can then enter the kingdom, because you do so as a child.
Right.
And then he talks about how he's going to choose us. He says, I will choose you 1 out of 1,000 and 2 out of 10,000, and they shall stand as a single one. Now again, that's an allusion to 1 shall chase 1,000 and 2
Yes.
shall chase
That
10,000.
makes
So what
sense.
he's going for is aggressive people.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? People who are aggressively going to fight. And that's why they shall stand as a single one, because anybody who's truly trying to fight this battle or whatever, they all know that they're on the same side.
Right.
And so they will be basically a force, a
Yes.
singular, unified force. And the disciples say to him, show us the place where you are, since it is necessary for us to seek it. Again, whoever has ears, let him hear. There is a light within a man of light, and he lights up the whole world. If he doesn't shine, then he is darkness.
Yes.
So what is the light and what is the darkness then? Again, whoever comes to understand these words will not taste of death. Death is
Right.
associated with darkness, life is associated with light, for example.
Yes.
So you have the kingdom of light, you have the kingdom of darkness, you have the children of light, you have the children of darkness. You have knowledge, you have ignorance, you have all of these polar opposites throughout this
Yes.
book. So this one's actually pretty simple. If, for example, you see that light that is contained within that heavenly meaning, which is couched in the earthly terminology, for
Yes.
example, that the two are one, that there's a heavenly and an earthly aspect to something, but it's all contained within one set of scriptures.
Yes.
In other words, it's all contained in, you know, what is before you, in other words, right? So if you're able then to expound and to exposit, then you can show other people what you see, right? Then you can be a light to other people.
Right.
and you can light up the whole world, because that's what this is meant to do. This is meant to be an antidote to ignorance.
Yes.
You see, it's meant to be an antidote to darkness.
Mhm.
And so that's what this is. And then it goes on, and Jesus said, love your brother like your soul, and guard him like the pupil of your eye.
Wow.
Well, again, it goes back to who is my brother. It's a little bit like who is my neighbor,
Right.
right?
This parallels where it says to love your neighbor as yourself in Leviticus 19:18.
But, okay, but if, for example, your soul, you're looking to, how should I say, if you're looking at your neighbor as sort of an extension of yourself, that's a little bit like the inside is like the outside. In
Yes.
fact, if you're having a mutual conversation with people, experience with people, in a lot of ways the two does become one.
Yes.
Because, you know, if you're having a conversation, it goes both ways. If you're having a relationship, it goes both ways. There is the relationship between two people, right?
Yes.
But that relationship is kind of one thing,
Yes.
right? So the idea is that if you exist in a realm where the Lord is trying to open your eyes and is trying to pull you out of death, trying to pull you out of darkness, right?
Yes.
The only way for you to really be one with him is if you are allowing that to manifest in, because you are his members, right?
Yes.
That his
Yes.
hands become your hands, that his mouth becomes your mouth, his eyes, his ears, his thoughts, whatever become your thoughts, and that you extend that to your neighbor, because the whole world, in a sense, has to come alive
Yes.
before this whole thing inverts.
Yes.
And the kingdom that is above, you know, comes down, and his kingdom is here on earth as it is in heaven, as he speaks. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. That's what we're praying for, striving for.
Soul sometimes is referred to as thoughts, will, and emotions. So if you're loving your brother, someone else, someone separate from you, in the same way, with the same connection, with the same understanding as your own thoughts, will, and emotions, then there's a connection in there. And I believe that there should be a desire for the benefit of the other.
I think in a lot of ways you really don't shine until you shine for other people. You know, you don't take it and put it, you know, in a secret place or under a bushel or whatever, as it says, because
Yeah.
that's the whole point of it.
Yes.
Well, it's like a lot of things. I mean, if you've
Don't
ever
be
felt,
selfish.
if you've ever held a baby in your arms, if you've ever
Mhm.
held a puppy or a kitten or something, you can feel something there. There's
Yes.
something that your heart feels.
Yes.
There's something that is intangible that exists between you two.
Yes.
Right? So if you're not then holding that baby, or you're not then holding the puppy or whatever, right, then that closeness kind of disappears.
Yes.
So in other words, if you and your brother are one thing,
Yes.
you know what I'm saying? Because the love doesn't really exist until you give it.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? It's not there if it's all theoretical.
Give it
It has to be,
yes.
it has to manifest in the flesh in order for it to be real.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Just like you have to actually hold the baby or to
Yeah.
really feel the baby.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? So that, you know, you're not different from your neighbor is what he's saying. And that makes a lot of sense even on a secular level, because, you know, what is charity if you're not giving to somebody?
Right.
You know, what is benefaction if you're not benefiting anybody? It's
Right.
not really anything.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So this is
What
this
came
is
up,
him.
what came up in my mind is kind of like the connection between faith and works. You can't have one without the other.
Yes.
Because in theory, right, or the Bible even says, hey, you know, hey, just go and be filled. And without giving him something, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of empty, you know? So if you're really looking to progress, you have to see others in yourself, because
Yeah.
you can't be worth anything really unless you're worth something to somebody. You know what I'm saying? It just doesn't work. You see the mote in your brother's eye, again, it's your brother, but you do not see the beam in your own eye. When you cast the beam out of your own eye, then you can see clearly to cast the mote from your brother's eye.
Right.
So, what's the relationship here? Because apparently he's using brother and brother sequentially here, so
Yes.
you might want to ask why that is. What is the beam? What is the mote? Well, okay, a couple of things. One of the term canon has to do with cane or measuring rod. In our language, canon, basically, it doesn't sound like much of anything. But our word cane, C-A-N-E, like measuring cane, or, you know, some offer the cane or something. Aaron's rod, in other words,
Right.
those words all are derived from the word cane.
Right.
And then canon is derived from that as well, right? So if you see that beam as being that particular restriction, seeing only the canon, for example, right? Seeing only through the 66 books or whatever, that would be like saying that was the beam or the cane or the canon in your eye,
Okay.
right? You see, kind of like that. Now, if the brother happens to be the elect, if the brother happens to be the chosen of the Lord, the ones who see, in other words, right? If you happen to see the mote in your brother's eye, what is that mote? That mote is something that's considerably smaller than what is in your eye. And I think what that's referring to is that there's a lot of criticism surrounding these books and these teachings. And most of it just has to do with a bias. Like if you were to take somebody who had a naive intelligence of Christianity, had no idea about the canon, for example, and you just placed all of these books before them, what is the likelihood that they would all settle down on just the same 66? There would probably be a lot of books that they didn't accept that were part of the 66, and probably be a lot of books that they did accept that weren't,
Right.
right? Because a lot of this is arbitrary. A lot of this has to do with happenstance and whatnot. You know what I'm saying? Because we don't understand it from the inside, we understand it from the outside.
Yes.
And so what you see as flaws in these books, right? What you see as erroneous in these books or whatever, generally speaking, what I'm going to say is that comes from a lack of your ability to understand them. And so you're judging the scriptures, let's say, and by extension those who believe them, you see what I'm saying, to be at fault, when in fact you're seeing through the paradigm of the canon. You're seeing through the paradigm of the 66 or whatever number of books that your particular religion allows you to see through,
Right.
And because you're not able to transcend that, you're not really qualified to judge your brother.
Right.
You see what I'm
Right.
saying?
Yes.
So, and it says, if you do not fast with regards to the world, you will not find the kingdom. If you do not observe the Sabbath as a Sabbath, you will not see the Father.
Right.
Well, okay. Fasting with regards to the world. And, okay, so what does that have to do with the Sabbath? Well, again, 6 days were given over to man to do his works. And then the Sabbath is holy unto the Lord, and that's your
Right.
day of dedication to him. The Sabbath was created for your benefit so that you could experience rest, let's
Yes,
say.
yes.
All right? And rest, as far as this book is concerned, is mostly in the way of what we might call accomplishment. When we
Yes.
say we rest our case, or that, you know, you've come to a conclusion and now you've spoken your piece, let's say. I mean, we make these same kind of general associations with, you know, I'm there. You know what I'm saying? I presented it, there it is, I rest my case, right? Resting in this particular context has to do with searching, and then you find it, and then once you found it, then you are at rest, then you are at peace, then you are satisfied, let's say. So at that point, you become at peace, right? So that, figuratively speaking, you are a Sabbath, right? Because you are at rest, and the Sabbath day is for rest.
Yes.
And so at that particular point, you are at rest on the Sabbath. And what would the spiritual Sabbath be? A day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years are as a day. I know that there's some conflict as to the actual dating and stuff like that. I'm not 100% sure what that has to do with, because there's sort of a conflict between people's datings based on various manuscripts and stuff. And
Yes.
some of these manuscripts are off and different from others. And so when you say 7 days and 7,000 years, other people, they see them with different calendars and stuff.
Yes,
And so it's
yes.
hard to say.
Yes. I wanted to go back to Legion 26
Uh-huh.
on where it says, you see the mote in your brother's eye, but you don't see the beam in your own eye. And then you reference canon. But also, a cane can be used for punishment. So when you are limited in your perspective and understanding and judging your brother harshly, you know, this is part of it. In other words, judge yourself first. And then, you know, you can speak to your brother and say, you know, we need a tweak here, or you need a tweak there. But, you know, we need to be looking at ourselves first.
So, anyway, but yeah, I mean, what that's basically saying is, that, you know, that you're, as long as you're in that position where you're not seeing your brother through the eyes
I
of
rest my
truth.
case.
Yeah.
I've shown you
Right.
everything
Right.
to prove my point, but you're not open to the other person.
Okay. Well, I'm probably gonna put it into it right about now. I think we're ready to move on to services, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll
Thank
maybe
you,
pick
Brother
up,
Robert.
next time up here, maybe we'll pick it up on 28.
Robert, thank you.
Yes, so much.
Thank you, Robert, and
Closing prayers?
closing prayer, we want to lift up Pastor Stephen in prayer about his ministry work with the military, and Miss Kay's having trouble with her vehicle issues and all,
Bill?
and health issues. We have some other friends that are having surgeries
Yes.
that need
Prayer?
a prayer guidance with the doctor's hands.
Yes.
And what else? Anybody else have anything else?
Health issues.
Health issues? Okay.
Health issues, financial issues.
Work issues.
Brother
Yeah.
Jeff,
Work stresses.
Yes.
how's it working out with your injury case? Working out?
I think I'm gonna need a personal injury attorney. I don't think they're taking me seriously.
Yes, we'll keep that in prayer too.
Keep that in prayer.
Yes.
Anything else? Okay. Father in heaven, thank you for this good word from your child,
Yes.
Robert Ferrell.
Yes.
Father, and you need to take it to heart.
Yes.
Some of these things are not all literal physical. Sometimes a lot of these things are spiritual.
Yes.
We need to see with spiritual eyes and hear with spiritual ears what you have for us, Father.
Yes.
Father, and thank you for the Sabbath day that we can worship you in spirit and truth and meet all of our needs according to your riches in glory in Yeshua, with healings, with vehicles, with injuries, and all kinds of things, Father. And just lift up Pastor Stephen as he ministers to the troops right now, Father. Looking forward to him coming back next week, Father.
Yes.
We bless you, we thank you on the Sabbath day. In Yeshua's name, amen. Shabbat Shalom, everyone, on this 13th day of the month Shabbat on the Hebrew calendar, 5783, or better known as February 4th, 2023. And also, because it's February, almost full 2 years ago, my friend passed. I'll be saying the Kaddish later on. Steve Collins. Anyways, we blow the shofars because according to Torah, in Leviticus 23, Numbers chapter 10, Joel chapter 2, 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, and in Joshua, bit in the Battle of Jericho in the book of Joshua, I think it's chapter 3 or 4 or something like that, Battle of Jericho, which we sing about a lot of times. But let's say the blessing. Rukatana Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lishmoa kol hashofar. Amen. Blessed are you, Yahweh our Elohim, King of the universe, who has sanctified us by his commandments and commanded us to heed, hear, listen, and obey the voice, the sound of the shofar. Amen. Hallelujah!
Behold, the bridegroom cometh.
Okay. When asked that Brother Robert comes up, he's going to be further doing some more teaching on the Gospel of Thomas today.
Yay.
Some more insights between that and the other Gospels in the canon of Scripture. And come on up here.
Right.